So we formed this at the end of 2023, and everyone's aware now that we're in the season of the 250th anniversary of the prelude to the Revolution and the Revolutionary War. So you've seen some of the events that occurred in Lexington and Concord on the 19th. So we discovered that Northborough had a very rich history in the Revolutionary War, leading up to the Revolutionary War and during the Revolutionary War. So we got together with several different committees in town and nonprofits to form the Revolution 250 Committee. It's made up of the Historic District Commission, so myself and Brian Smith from the Historic District Commission are on there, the Cultural Council, Community Affairs, and Cable Access TV. And for nonprofits, we have the Historical Society and the American Legion, and even the Garden Club is a member. And it's a volunteer organization. We basically went through the history of the Revolution and Northborough's role in it, and we found that there's some significant events which we'll be covering today, such as the Northborough Tea Party, the Northborough Minutemen, Bunker Hill, and the Colonel Knox and his cannon train that passed through Northborough in January of 1776. Next slide. To date, we've been very busy. 2026, again, 2025 is the prelude to the war, leading up to April 19th. We've had published already 5 videos. We're going to cover some of the subjects today. We have more in production, and there's going to probably be a total of 10 to 12 more videos over the next year. And these are all posted on our website. We have a Witness House photo exhibit. Michael Roman is here. He's the photographer that did this. Did an excellent job. We had a very good turnout on the 19th, and I'll show you that in a second. And Norm had mentioned on May 3rd, we're going to have the big Minutemen Day commemoration on the town common. We're also planning to march in the Bunker Hill Parade in June of 2025. And we are also in negotiation now with the Knox Trail Committee that's set up, and they're supposed to have some parades through town. They're going to be having a celebration in Worcester of all the surrounding Knox Trail towns. I'll be covering that in a little more detail. We have a CPA request for a Revolutionary War monument, and we're planning a major event next year for the Declaration of Independence. The Northborough Declaration of Independence was actually 1 month before July 4th. Next slide, please. This is the Witness House exhibit that many of you have seen, and again, it's online. These are the 27 houses that existed that were built during or before the Revolution. Typically, I think dated back to 1710, I believe, Michael?
1700, there were several, 1700.
Good. And again, Michael did a great job on that. Next slide, please. This is one example of the Captain Wood House, which happens to be the home of Brian and Lois Smith. So that's just one example of what we've done. Next slide. We have this is our Revolutionary War request for CPA funding. And this is going to be by the Civil War Memorial. It'll be similar to the Veterans Memorial, and this is our design. And it's dedicated not just to the 124 Northborough soldiers that fought in the Revolutionary War, but also all of the townspeople that supported the war through donations, clothing, their taxes, and it's really a dedication to the whole town for the support of the war. Next slide. There we go. Funding. Just a brief funding. We did have some ARPA funding to get us through this year. We've also had some Historical Society support, as well as a Historic District Commission. But the major source of funding was the $9,000 we got from ARPA. We are requesting $15,000 under town warrants. Make sure you go to a town meeting. And we're hoping, and that would certainly carry us through 2026 for some of the major events. So that's basically a summary of the Revolution 250 Committee. Next slide, and I think that's Norm.
Thanks, Bob. So we broke the presentation up. There's prelude to war, then during the war, and then post-war. So we're doing prelude to war. Nadine, thanks. Yeah, you can change the slide. So the Tea Party, early February 1774. So you were already informed that the Tea Party was held 10 months before the Tea Party in Boston. That has been the story for about 150 years. It is absolutely wrong. The Tea Party was held 2 months after the Boston Tea Party, and you'll see why. Next slide, Nadine. So the problem is it was a wrong reference. What happened is Northborough historians, since Reverend Allen in 1866 said it was February 1773 that the Tea Party occurred. And every historian after that used his reference as the proper reference. So since he gave us, the reference told us the Massachusetts Gazette, Boston Poor Boy newspaper, and it was February 1773. In this day and age, you can find those newspapers online. I was able to get the Antiquarian Society to find me that newspaper. I looked in April. I looked in March. I looked in February. There was no reference at all to that. Long story short, when I went to the following February in 1774, bingo, we found the article. And it was in a different paper. It was in the Boston Gazette and Country Journal. So it occurred 2 months after the Boston Tea Party. So I know that's kind of all our bragging rights about before that we've done for like 160 years were in error. So this is the article. This is the headline of the paper. It's the Boston Gazette and Country Journal. And it says, "We hear from Shrewsbury that one day last week, a peddler was observed to go into a tavern there in a bag containing about 30 pounds of tea, information of which being held at Northborough, about 5 miles distance. A number of Indians went from the Great Swamp and thereabouts, seized upon it, and committed it to the flames on the road facing said tavern, where it was entirely consumed." And this is verbatim to the same reference that Reverend Allen used. So this is what he was referencing. I have no idea why the year is wrong. Next slide. There's a lot of loose ends with that. And one day I hope we can find some diary that actually explains what's going on here. I think we know where the Great Swamp is. I'll show you that in the next slide. Which tavern in Shrewsbury? There were a bunch of taverns in Shrewsbury. It does appear that it was along the Boston Post Road between the center of Northborough and the center of Shrewsbury. And there's one tavern that was just essentially across the street from Ward Hill, and then there's one further up the road. So there's got to be someone in Shrewsbury that has a note that tells us where this occurred. Northborough citizens, that's implied that they're Northborough citizens in Allen's report. There's nothing in that thing that said it was Northborough citizens were addressed as Native Americans. So he implied that, yeah, okay, these were Northborough citizens doing this. That's the peddler. It appears that the peddler's been identified. It was a Mr. Cutler. He lived in Northborough. He was also arrested for being a loyalist, and that'll come up a little later. And I really want to somehow find some primary source information on this event because it's missing and there's a lot of loose ends, which is leading to a lot of stories. And there's a really nice plaque in Shrewsbury Common on the ground, and it says the same date that is the wrong date. So they also have the wrong information in a nice brass plaque. Next slide. So the Great Swamp appears to be, this is a current day map. And I can use my pointer, can't I? So this is West Main Street. This is the Shrewsbury line. And this is, according to the 1830 map, this is the Cold Harbor Meadow Brook, and this is the Cedar Swamp. So this area makes sense that it was called the Great Swamp down in colonial times. So that everything makes sense that whatever happened along this road, West Main Street, going into Shrewsbury. Next slide. British spies. How many people know about the British spies in Northborough? All right. So, of course, the Brits know about the British spy in Northborough. So this is in late February 1775. Next slide. So General Gage, who was the commander of the British forces in Boston, was very concerned. He knew that the colonists living in the countryside were storing cannon, were getting ammunition and large quantities of gunpowder. He knew this was happening in the countryside, be it Salem, Concord, or Worcester. So what he did is he needed to understand what was going on in the area. So he, in preparation of a possible conflict with British authority, which is what he was worried about, he needed information about the local geography west of Boston. So he was planning to march troops in that area in the spring of 1775. So he's planning ahead. He wants to know what's going on. He wants to know where he can go. Next slide. Next one. Good. So, by good fortune, he sent out 2 British soldiers, Captain Brown and Ensign de Benier. He sent them out on February 22nd, 1775 to do exactly that, to search the area. He ordered them to take and sketch the roads, passes, thank you, heights, and from Boston to Worcester, and to make other observations. So we're very fortunate that the Massachusetts Historical Society has their diary of their trip. So if you want to look it up, we're not going to talk about all the details of the diary, of all of the incidences that happened. But if you read last month's Hourglass, there was a lot more information about this event. Next slide. So I'll read this, if you don't mind. This is the section that deals with what happened in Northborough. We took a road we had not come and led us to the pass 4 miles from Worcester. We went on unobserved, so they're now coming back from Worcester on their way back to Boston. We went unobserved by anyone until we passed Shrewsbury, where we were then overtaken by a horseman who examined us very attentively, and especially me, whom he looked at from head to foot as if he wanted to know me again. After he had taken his observations, he rode off pretty hard and took the Marlborough Road. But by good luck, we took the Framingham Road. Again, to be more perfect in it. We thought we would be the one made use of. So the bottom line is at the intersection of the Marlborough Road and the Framingham Road, this is where the rider met up with the 2 British spies. Next slide. Where is that? This West Main Street, I did not realize it was a relatively new construction, sometimes in the 30s. It must have been when they were playing around with Route 20. So the old Colony Road, which right now is behind Monty's Pizza, the old Colony Road is the original Old Boston Post Road. This intersection where this is now Davis Street was called the road to Framingham. So right at that intersection is where the interaction occurred between them and the rider. Next slide. So as a result of this, General Gage realized the challenges of bringing the forces to Worcester. If you get a chance to read this diary, you realize that nobody wanted those spies here and they were having a hard time. They were identified and not really treated well. So he decided to bring his forces instead to Concord. The war would have started on the road to Worcester if it didn't start in Concord. Next slide. During the war. All right. The Northborough Minutemen, April 19th. Now we're going over to Bob, right? You're doing the Minutemen?
Next slide, please. Next slide. So Northborough was a very revolutionary town, as was many other towns in Middlesex and Worcester counties. And there were much leading up to the fact that people felt that there was going to be a revolution and an armed rebellion. So as early as November of 1774, the town voted to buy 100 weight of powder, 300 weight of lead and flints. Next slide. And that went to the formation of a company of Minutemen, 50 in all, which trained in the spring of 1775 at the muster field, which was right by the current church in Pleasant Street. across from the Unitarian Church. So they didn't have very long to train when on April 19th, they were getting a sermon from Reverend Peter Whitney. And at 12 o'clock, they heard of the fighting at Lexington. Now, the fighting at Lexington would have been over around 6 a.m. So communications were pretty good back then to get here. But I'll go through some of the timelines in a little more detail. So at that point, they repaired to their homes, bade goodbye to their families, assembled at the home of Captain Wood, and left for Boston within 3 to 4 hours of the news from Lexington. So that would have been about 3 to 4 o'clock when they left, and I'm not sure where their destination was. That's kind of an interesting historical mystery that we could look into at some point. Next slide. So we have a list of all 50 Minutemen. It was the commander was Captain Samuel Wood, and his brother Abraham Wood was the clerk. He had some other relatives. These are Timothy Brigham was his nephew, and Thomas Seaver. And this is the rest of the Minutemen. I'm not going to go through the list, but you can see that there's some very famous names. We have the Rice family, Goddards, the Goodenows. Okay. So we have all the names. A lot of our streets are up there. Okay. Next slide, please. So I want to go through a timeline of the events of April 19th, because the question is, where did they go? Did they get into the fight or not? And there really is no word of what happened after they left Northborough. But this is basically shows the retreat of the British from Concord back to Boston. When they first left, first of all, Paul Revere came through Charleston before the British left, and he went again towards Lexington, where Sam Adams and John Hancock were hiding out. And Dawes came through the neck of Boston, the southern route, across the bridge, across the Charles into Cambridge, and basically the same route. The British left and crossed Back Bay, Back Bay is a landfill right now, but it was basically the bay. Got into Cambridge here, and then basically traveled this distance. Now they were supposed to leave they left in the middle of the night by boat. They were supposed to get organized and leave by around 2 a.m. I think they left, it was actually more like 3 a.m. They got to Lexington roughly 5 o'clock. And so it was a good march for them. I think that's 9 miles. The Battle of Lexington happened, I think it was 5:45. And then at that point, word got out that they were headed for Concord. Now there's a lot of evidence that shows that the colonials knew where they were intended to go. And they knew it was going to be Concord, where the stores of armaments were. So it's possible that word got out to some of the other colonies, some of the other towns before 6 a.m. They got to Cambridge, Concord at 9 o'clock. The battle at North Bridge was around 9:30. I'm not going to go into all the details of the battle, but basically they got repulsed and they retreated. And they were heading back to Boston, and there were battles all along the way through Concord, Lincoln, and back to Lexington. Now, what I want to point out is if you look at Miriam's Corner, where there was a major conflict, Brooks Hill and Bloody Angle. At Brooks Hill, the Framingham and Sudbury militia made it there. So the Framingham now Sudbury is, 7 miles away, roughly. So they were able, they must have got word well before the Battle of Concord, and they were able to make it there. Now, Northborough is 20 miles from Concord, and that would have been a tough march, especially if they left at 3 or 4 in the afternoon. But they would have gone through Sudbury, and then on, and I think it's like 6 or 7 miles. And then the British, fortunately for them, called for reinforcements. So Percy's troops came through the neck, and they met up at Lexington around 2:30 that afternoon as the British were retreating. That was Colonel Smith was retreating and came up and met with Percy, who took command. And then the rest of the way went through. The big conflict was at Monotamy. That was where actually more than half of all casualties on both sides occurred at that place. Then they got to in Cambridge, and they made the fortunate decision to make a left turn and go through to Charlestown, as opposed to going the route that they were supposed to go through the neck, because most of the colonials were here by the bridge to meet them. So they were able to get to Charleston. It was a rough day for the British, and they basically went 40 miles in about 21 hours of fighting and marching. So where did Northborough go to? Well, Northborough would have, if they had gone northeast, they would have to Lexington, Concord. They would have been. They wouldn't obviously not have gotten here. And that would have been a 20-mile trip. If they went on to Boston, that would have been a 30-mile trip. Chances are they would have gotten there until that night. The British had already gotten to Charlestown around 7 o'clock. So it's obvious that the Minutemen did not fight that day, and it's not really clear to me where they actually wound up. Did they stop along the way? But they probably, we believe they went on to Concord. Next slide. So, basically it was, I kind of covered this, but it was a tough, grueling day for the British. Next slide. So there's a poem that was written called The Minutemen of Northborough by Wallace Rice. He's from Chicago. His son was from Northborough. It might have been the same Rice family as some of the Minutemen. But this was written in 1900, 125 years after the battle. And in it, he talks about the battle of the retreat from Concord back to Boston, which clearly the Northborough Minutemen would not have participated in. But he talks about it, at every town, new streams of men join the mighty flow. At every crossroad comes the message of a fleeing foe. I like this stanza, though. The Minutemen of Northborough set out with drum and fife. With shining eyes, they've blessed their babes and bid their wives goodbye. But the end of the poem does talk about Bunker Hill. The Minutemen of Northborough sit down by Boston town. They fight and bled at Bunker Hill. They cheer for Washington. In thankfulness, they speed their bold against the British crown and take the plow again in peace, their warriors' duty done. Next slide. So that leads us to Bunker Hill. Next slide. So the colonials had a good spy system. They knew that Howe, it was Gage at the time, was a commander, and they knew that his plan was to attack Charlestown and also the southern part, the Neck, and also Dorchester Heights. But they were prepared for Dorchester. So the head of this was before Washington, the head of the colonials, the commander, was Artemus Ward, and he's actually from Shrewsbury. And he sent Prescott to defend Charlestown Peninsula. Now, he only went with a small force because Ward had to defend the rest of Cambridge and Roxbury and Dorchester. So Prescott, with about 3,000 men, now the British thought they had more than like 6,000 men, so the British were prepared for a much bigger force against them. They built the redoubt on Breed's Hill, which is further south from. So this is Peninsula. So what happened was, this is the way Charlestown looked. There's the town of Charlestown. This is a much more defendable hill, Bunker Hill. It's higher, and it also is a narrower part of the peninsula. so it would have been more difficult for the British to flank them. But for some odd reason, they built the redoubt on Breed's Hill. Now, there's some think that it was a mistake or it was dark and they didn't see what they were doing. But another account by Atkinson's books says that it was actually on purpose because the Prescott's artillery and engineer felt that this hill was easier to build a redoubt. So we're not really sure why, but that's where they were. There was also a rail fence over here which protected the left flank of the colonials, and that was then reinforced. So very, very briefly though, there was basically 3 major attacks by Howe. General Howe commanded the overall attack, and he attacked first on the colonial left against the rail fence, while there was a secondary attack at Breed's Hill. Both were repulsed severely. The second attack concentrated on Breed's Hill, and again, that was repulsed. Now, interestingly, there was colonials in the town of Charlestown firing on the flank of the British. The British then heated up cannonball from their ships and shot into Charlestown to burn the town down. And there was also, over at Copp's Hill in Boston, they shot exploding incendiary shells and basically burned down the town to basically stop the colonials from firing on the flank. The third attack, however, was successful. There was a major supply problem with the colonials. They were running out of ammunition. Basically, very few people had the ammunition left at the time, and they were overrun. Some say it was a rout, but others analyzed it and said that actually the colonials retreated in good order. And basically, the troops that were here on the fence were basically covering the rear of the retreat. There were some also skirmishes on the Bunker Hill before the colonials left the neck. Next slide. And we do know that Captain Wood and the Northborough Minutemen were fought there. At least half of the troop was in the Charlestown Peninsula fighting. Okay, there was over 1,000 casualties for the British. It was about 40% of their attacking force. Even though they won the battle, they only took over roughly a square mile of rebel territory. For 1,000 casualties, 226 were dead, heavily in the officer ranks. By the way, one of the officers killed was Major Pitcairn, who was the major that led the attack on Lexington, and he was killed. The American casualties were 450 dead, 138 dead, 450 casualties, including General Warren. Afterwards, General Nathaniel Greene said, "I wish we could sell them another hill at the same price." William Tudor, in a letter to Benjamin Franklin, said, "The British gained the hill, but we're victorious losers. A few more such victories and they are undone." Okay, next slide. Okay, Knox train. Next slide, please. So, actually before Bunker Hill, the colonials took over Fort Ticonderoga, and they captured a lot of the British cannon there. When Washington took command of the colonial forces in July, he sent Colonel Knox of the Massachusetts militia to bring the cannon back from Ticonderoga. This was in November. Colonel Knox took the roughly 59 pieces of cannon, mortars, and howitzers, roughly 60 tons, in the dead of winter, about 300 miles from Fort George, where the cannon, that was at the southern part of Lake George, from Ticonderoga, through New York, through to South Boston. He went across the frozen Hudson River and the Connecticut River over the Berkshires in winter. He arrived in Framingham on January 25th, where he left the cannon and then rode on to report to General Washington. Next slide. And this is shows the trail. So Fort Ticonderoga, they went by sea to Fort George, and then this is where they traveled to Worcester and then through Northborough. Now, there is an organization called the Knox Trail Organization, which has laid out markers, a total of 58 markers showing the trail. Northborough has a marker in front of Town Hall, which is designated as Massachusetts 18. We believe, based on the fact that he was in Framingham on the 25th, he's probably through Northborough either the 23rd or 24th. There's going to be a celebration next year in Worcester for the surrounding towns, which would include Northborough, Brookfield, Spencer, Leicester, and Shrewsbury. Next slide. And then what happened was eventually the cannon was moved to Dorchester Heights, which overlooked Boston. Boston, the British were starving by that time. The supplies were very short. Plus, with the cannon overlooking the town, at first they wanted to attack Dorchester Heights, but a storm prevented them, and then they just decided to leave. So they evacuated Boston and went for Halifax. So it was a successful trip. Okay, Northborough independence. Again, as I mentioned, Northborough was very active in the lead up to the Revolutionary War. There was a strong sentiment for independence. The town warrants started to drop the name in the king's name on all the town warrants. And then the Massachusetts General Court had asked the town for their opinion on independence. So on June 3rd, 1776, 1 month before the Declaration of Independence, the town voted. Next slide. And what they said is, this was their warrant motion. If it be the mind of this town to be independent of Great Britain, in case the Continental Congress think proper, and we are ready with our lives and our fortunes, if in Providence called to defend the same. And it passed in the affirmative 1 month before the Declaration of Independence. It took until September 12th before the publication of the Declaration of Independence made it to Northborough, where there was a reading of the Declaration and a sermon by Reverend Whitney. Next slide. Okay, and then just briefly summarize, next slide, please. We know that, we know that that there was a total of 124 Northborough men that fought in the Revolution. This would be an interesting project for a budding historian to try to figure out where they fought, what regiments they fought in. What we do know is that the Colonel Ward, who is a distant relative of Artemius Ward, had a regiment after Bunker Hill, and we know that Captain Wood fought with him. So we can suspect that because he was from Southborough, that's probably was the major regiment where the Northborough soldiers fought. So he fought, and there were various northern conflicts. We don't know where Northborough residents happened to fight. I'd like to do a research project to figure that out. But we do know that Ward and his regiment fought in the Battle of Long Island, Brooklyn, Kips Bay. These were all defeats and retreats. Fort Washington, Fort Lee fell to the British. They retreated across New Jersey, but they did win the battles. There were 2 battles of Trenton and at Princeton. And after that, they went to winter quarters up in Morristown, New Jersey. At that point, we know that Ward had, that the enlistment papers had run out and that the regiment was disbanded. Now, whether the Northborough soldiers from that regiment went on to re-enlist and go in other regiments, we don't know. But that would be an interesting program. Next slide.
Okay, home front. I think we're still dead. Yep, it's all right. The next slide for me. Thank you. There was a lot going on during the war in Northborough, and you don't hear so much about it, but I recommend taking a look at this book. There was the Loyalist problem, there was raising more troops, paying the troops, clothing the troops, getting money and food for military supplies. There was severe inflation, and the state constitution was trying to be read at the same time. So I'm going to read some of the things, a little more detail on those topics. So the Loyalist problem. In June of 1777, every town was required to identify a Loyalist in their town. Talk about squealing on your neighbors. In Northborough, they were disarmed and confined to their homes. The estates of Michael Martin, I think he was the son of Reverend Martin, who was a Loyalist, John and James Eager, their estates were confiscated and auctioned off. These are I pulled out two examples. There's a few more examples in the booklet of Loyalists and how they interacted. These are two very different examples. In 1776, Sylvanus Billings, he did not support the revolution, and he was confined to his farm. In 1781, he confessed that he was backward and unfriendly by not defending his country against the British power. And because of that apology, he was readmitted into the community. Mr. Ebenezer Cutler, who we talked about earlier because he seems to be the one that was the peddler that got his tea burned, he was a vocal opponent to the revolutionary cause in general. This resulted in him being charged by the Northborough Committee on Correspondence as an enemy of the country. He was arrested. Somehow he broke free. He made his way to Boston, and he accompanied the British Army as they evacuated Nova Scotia. So some stayed and some left. And when you really think about when they left, they lost their estates, they lost their money. They became refugees in Canada. So that was one of the Loyalist things. So the other thing is the town had to raise troops, pay for the troops, get funding in feeding and clothing for the troops. This was all the town's responsibility. So as the war moved south of New England, it just became harder to recruit volunteers because now they're not fighting at home, they're going elsewhere. So the government, or at least the Continental Congress, they sent up quotas that had to be set and bounties that had to be paid for the towns to bring in more soldiers. Even with these bounties and these quotas, it was very difficult to find applicants to serve. In 1781, the troops were being drafted. I didn't realize that there was drafting in the Revolutionary War because they were not getting the recruits that they needed. So if the town couldn't meet their quota, they went and they had to draft soldiers from their town. The towns had levies upon them, especially for beef. They had to provide the military with quantities of beef. In 1779, they actually had to fix price, all the agricultural prices were fixed, The agricultural prices were fixed to try and slow inflation. Inflation was crazy. One of the examples they gave in the book, it was like 1,000% over the period of the war. Paper money became absolutely, totally worthless. So all of this is going on. They're also trying to write the state constitution. So as it was being written, in 1778, they had a draft, and all the towns rejected it. And it took 2 more years before the town of Northborough finally accepted the revised version of the state constitution. Next slide. After the war. Just a few things. Now, when Washington became president, one of the things he did as president is he took tours of the country. He toured the South, he toured New York State, but he had his New England tour. And his New England tour came through Northborough October 23rd, 1789. Next slide. So if I can read this, if you go online, you can find George Washington's diary, and it has all the pages of his tour. And on this page, in October 23rd, he mentions from the road from Worcester to Marlborough is uneven but not bad. The country around Worcester and, let me see what I got. Worcester and onward, so he's heading from Worcester to Boston, towards Boston, is better improved in the lands of better quality than we traveled through yesterday, so as he was in the western part of the state. The crops, it is said, have been good: Indian corn, rye, buckwheat, and grasses, with beef, cattle, and pork are the produce of their farms. So he never specifically mentions Northborough, but we know what day he came through. And this is another case where you know the president came through. He came through with a huge entourage because when they met him in Worcester, there was a lot of people from Boston came out to guide him into Boston. So this wasn't George Washington and one horse on a stage coming through. I really want to find a diary that talks about his visit because you know the people in town knew he was coming through. This is not, there's got to be some information there. I'm dying to see that. Next slide. Now there's a marker in front of CVS. It's really for the 200th birthday of George Washington. And I think that the George Washington Memorial Highway is probably throughout the East Coast. And we're on it because the Boston Post Road, for those who don't realize, the Boston Post Road was like an interstate road. It was a critical road during the Revolutionary War. Next slide. Lafayette. So after 50, Lafayette was key in helping the revolutionist in the war. And he was very young. He was in his mid-20s, I think, as a general from France. 50 years later, he came to the States on a tour. He was touring for about a year and a half. He came through Boston twice, but on June 15th, 1825, he actually came through Northborough. Next slide. So there's this talks about his tour. So it's from July 1824 to September 1825. The Marquis de Lafayette, the last surviving major general of the American Revolution, made a tour of the 24 states of the United States. And if you go online, there's a whole, they're reenacting this tour right now. He was received by the populace with a hero's welcome and many stops and many honors, and monuments were presented to commemorate and memorialize his visit. Is there another slide? I don't remember if there's one more slide. So this is his tour from Brookfield to Worcester, through Northborough to Marlborough, Sudbury, and Boston. So he left Worcester in the morning of the June 15th, and he ended up in Boston in the afternoon of June 15th. So he was hightailing it pretty quick. If you go online, you can see where they had an event for him in Marlborough at the Savin House. And one more slide, I think. Go back one more, because I wanted to do one more thing about him. So what's happening now is this is the 200th year of his tour. And there's this whole organization that's putting together that tour, day to day, exactly as Lafayette had done it. So on June 15th, 2025, the tour is coming through Northborough. And I'm trying to find out exactly what that involves. I know there's a whole organization that's running this thing. They've already been running it for over a year. I know there's an event in Worcester, and I know there's an event in Sudbury at the Wayside Inn, and I'm trying to find out when's he's coming through town and who's available in town to actually greet the reenactors. And that's the end of our presentation, huh, Bob?